At the close of the previous episode of These Darkened Places, we began to wonder what kind of creature it is, what kind of disguised monstrosity stalks the city of Southfall, the trade nexus east of the Cape of Runkel, where once a ultimately doomed civilization made its home. And what we found was that this unique creature, this monstrosity disguising itself among the thieves and assassins of Southfall, is a strange amalgamation of draconic and swarm, a scarab worm, a once mighty dragon succumbed and ultimately fallen to a curse and consumed by shadow-darkened insects, turning into something else, something horrific. And we were left wondering, what does a creature like this want? Why is it stalking the shadows of the city? And as I was thinking about this, a couple of ideas emerged. So let's flesh those out, and then it's finally time to start working on our dungeon. Hello friends, Anderson here, welcome back to These Darkened Places, the campaign setup series for a SoloDark campaign, a solo supplement for the ShadowDark RPG. We're making some progress here in our building, and I am somewhat blown away by the response that I've gotten from, well, all of you out there watching and commenting, and I just like to say it's very much appreciated. Similarly, of course, as is liking the video and subscribing and continuing to comment. And while this series will inevitably make a couple of steps forward and then loop back to some previously devised concepts to flesh out and tie together and clarify a little bit, I think we're at a point where we can really put the finishing touches on our scarab worm, our shadow-darkened quasi-overlord of Southfall behind the scenes, and then move on to our dungeon design. Now, I am a little bit unhappy with the current state of our scarab worm and also with my own ability to kind of convey how I actually ended up thinking of this particular creature. I had a fairly spur-of-the-moment flash between those words draconic and swarm. And while it may sometimes look like with the editing that I'm sitting here thinking for quite a long time, and then the jump cut in the video makes it seem like the idea was there somewhat instantaneously, and that does happen, that I sit here and think about it for a while. With the scarab worm, it was really a case of where the amount of footage between the prompts arriving and me starting to just flesh out this creature was about 5 to 10 seconds. And a part I'm not too happy with about the previous episode is how it looks like I'm just sort of throwing this story together somewhat whole cloth and throwing in elements like a cursed or sentient blade killing this dragon and all kinds of things without really going over why I think that this is what happened. So let's take 5 minutes to step-by-step clarify the scarab worm, and then we can start designing our dungeon. Now, the part that I forgot to mention last time was that the initial inspiration for the prompt of the swarm and the draconic and the evil monster was, out of all things that popped into my head as I read those words, The Mummy, the movie from the late 90s with Imhotep. And the specific image that I flashed on was this mummified beef jerky version of the tortured high priest having like this kind of insect scarab crawling out of the cheek, and then I substitute a human face for a dragon face, and suddenly I have like a dragon corpse covered in scarabs, and I'm starting to wonder what the hell kind of a creature that is and how it ended up being this way. And then with what we built previously with this complex of the Shiga religion and the occult rewards that the champions of Shiga get, combined with the idea that these Shiga champions will go out of their way, especially the highly blessed ones, to kill very, very impressive targets. My idea was that there was maybe a cursed blade wielded by this champion of Shiga that for whatever reason came down to this back then unsettled river estuary where this dragon made its home and struck a mortal wound with this cursed blade, and that began to fester, and then out of the ShadowDark these insects came crawling, consumed the dragon, and created this new creature that now has some wants. And I think the wants themselves are very, very complex, because there might not be only one consciousness in that creature. There might be a struggle going on there between several kinds of consciousnesses that have been fused into this scarab worm. Let's make it a bit clearer and more structured, because I think the scarab worm also has something to do with the reason why there even is a city of Southfall. So if we think back to a time when Runkel was still a civilization, and maybe these entire Southlands were unsettled and untouched by humans who we assume come more from the northern sphere in this world, there, to my mind at least, was a sort of distant friendship / alliance between the Runkel civilization that extended its sphere of influence around here and this river estuary kind of place where this ancient good aligned dragon made its home. So an ancient good / gold question mark, probably it's a gold dragon, in my mind it is, makes its home in the river estuary that becomes much later the city of Southfall, allied and friendly with the Runkel elves and their deity. And what I'm thinking is, when the Runkel civilization fell, the dragon fought by their side, but ultimately failed and retreated back to its home, and grieving the fallen deity and the allied friendly elves. And as is its nature, the dragon chooses to remember its erstwhile allies by revisiting Runkel many times over the next couple of centuries and making off with all kinds of relics and treasure from there, and basically like hoarding this stuff. It's a dragon, that's kind of its nature. This is important for later because it'll help us make a case for why Southfall exists here. This is one of those things that kind of popped into my head as I was thinking about what does the dragon want, and why is there even a city here, and why is the dragon here under the city. All of this will probably make some semblance of sense. Because the dragon keeps revisiting Runkel, at some point our trapped Lich consciousness gets a little bit irritated by this, because it is no doubt messing with its undead minions, with its attempt for dominion and wiping out the Nahemok. So what happens is a Chosen of Shiga enters the picture. We assume that the Lich managed to secure the services of a Chosen of Shiga from quite far away at this point, because we do assume that this area at this point is not settled by humankind at all, and that this Chosen of Shiga makes the way down here to this island and strikes this mortal blow to our dragon. So the Runkel Lich, annoyed by the dragon's visitations, sends for a Chosen of Shiga, and we can assume that this Lich knows about this Chosen of Shiga because we remember that the Lich has initially left Runkel after some kind of falling out with the civilization, with the deity, and then came back as an invader. So there is some prior connection that the Lich here leverages. And this champion of Shiga travels to the Southlands unsettled back then and strikes a festering wound that ultimately kills the dragon. And the Chosen of Shiga probably also dies in the attempt. And that gives us a really nice tie-in of why the Shiga religion is actually here. I'm assuming this Chosen of Shiga is like a special character, a legendary Chosen who went south And then the religion ends up wondering, hey, what the hell happened there? And they greatly revere this person, and so they flock here and they make it an important religious place. So now we've got a dead dragon and the ShadowDark down there, maybe below where we have this river island. I'm picturing sort of like a steep cliff, almost like a waterfall where the river falls down, and there's quite a lot of room to go down below. So this river island is kind of jutting out into this cliff face almost. And back then there was like a surface level entrance that the dragon used to enter and leave its subterranean lair, like deep down where it keeps the Runkel treasure, and that's where it dies. However, fast forward several centuries and humankind spreads further south and explorers arrive, and the legends of the champion of Shiga, they are also still float around, and the religion knows that there was this attempt on a dragon that probably somehow succeeded, but also cost the life of the chosen, and this eventually leads to 3 greedy, intrepid bastards making their way into the dragon's lair. 3 thieves attracted by the dragon horde that they hear is legendary, and what they find down there instead is the scarab worm. So centuries later, 3 thieves descend into the scarab worm's lair following the lure of obscure legends about a massive treasure hoard. And in that scene down there, subterranean cavern, scarab worm rears up 3 tiny silhouettes standing there, shocked and horrified by what they found, is where the city of Southfall finds its beginning. Because instead of swiping them aside and crushing them, the horrific amalgamation of desiccated flesh and crawling scarabs starts to speak to them, and they reach an accord that is solidified as some of these scuttling insects, before they even realize what is going on, crawl over our 3 thieves, and some of them disappear, burying themselves through their eye sockets and possessing parts of their consciousness. Because I think that's what the scarab worm can do. It can preserve its core swarm around the dragon corpse, but it can send individual scarabs to possess minds, and it can also branch off little submasses of itself, still tied to the main consciousness, that assume like a human form and disguise themselves and walk around, and that's how it can influence things from underneath without ever leaving its lair. And now that it's got its 3 thieves under control, and with the hoard, with the money there, it instructs them to create the city of Southfall. So the thieves encounter the scarab worm, which offers them an accord, but also possesses them via scarab insertion, bidding them to found the city up above using its hoard. And then once the city stands for a while, a delegation of Shiga faithful arrives and founds the temple, and they're striking a deal with the 3 main noble houses, thieving houses rather, because they're the descendants of our 3 thieves. Now, let's give our scarab worm a name. The Book of Random Tables 5 has a table of dragon names that we can use, and it's a D100 table. The red one goes first. 08 Vermithrax. I mean, what the hell? Presumably that's the name it goes by now, and not its original name, because the Vermi connection is just too good. Wow. That may have been slightly more than 5 minutes, sorry about that, but I think this is a very important player in this overall region, and looking at how the dynamic of these videos is currently developing, I feel like there's always going to be a scenario where the first half of a video is very likely going to be working through the prompt of the previous video, because there is so much to extract in terms of details and interconnectivity of these various players and places here. Before we continue, let me quickly butt into this video from the editing room, because after all that setup, we haven't actually drawn a conclusion regarding what does the scarab worm want, and there are Two reasons for that. One is that with everything we've just determined, the Scarab Worm is a pretty good foil to want just about anything. Having 4 separate consciousness elements fused into it, the dragon, the tortured, insane, formerly good aspect, the swarm itself, this more base need, feeding, hungering, procreating drive, the ShadowDark that also infuses this creature, and the blade itself embedded into it still and filling it with whispers of Shiga, which makes just about anything justifiable. That's almost a little bit of a cop-out here, but only if we don't follow through on it. So what I want to do is, and that brings me to the next component here, why I'm not deciding it ultimately, finally yet. I want to pick up some more of your feedback from the comments, and while there's already been some coming in as I'm recording this, I am recording it relatively close to the previous episode, and I'd like to give it a bit more time, and so we will pick this up towards the end of the series again and make a little bit of a random table of what this Scarab Worm may at any given moment be pursuing, which then might in turn influence events in the city, depending on whether it's tortured former self, its base need swarm, intelligence, its ShadowDark aspect, or even the Shiga aspect are currently dominant. Same goes for all other comments you leave me. I will pick up on them a little bit more down the line and collect them first, because that way I can integrate more of your thoughts and ideas without it leading to a gap in the video uploads. So that's it for now. Back to the regular footage from the actual recording session. But now it's finally time for something new, the dungeon. Our final shadow darkened place that begins with the village near it, because that is how I want to build this. I want to start the dungeon by first determining the type of region it's in, and then our sanctuary village where our story hooks will be placed, and then finally we can determine the type of dungeon also somewhat from these context clues that the area and the village give us. And of course we go back to worlds without number, because we do have in the communities section a rural village generator. And while I assume that the rurality of the whole thing is a given, because I want this dungeon to be a bit remote, I would like to start off again by rolling 1 die 20 on our significant terrain feature table and determine what kind of location our village is in. Okay, 19, volcano. Sorry about that. I think I threw the dice a little bit too energetically and ended up throwing it halfway across the room and had to basically re-roll it again. So volcano. Volcano suggests the presence of a whole bunch of mountains, which we can assume sort of a natural border mountain range running through this whole territory here, which is also this sphere of influence separator almost somewhat naturally. I'm just going to follow the terrain, or rather I'm going to let the terrain follow this sketched out border that I did here, and then maybe bring it down a bit here as well, let it run towards the coast, and it's going to taper off here a little bit. I would also somewhat explain why this area hasn't been reached very much previously when Runkel was still here. In light of that, we could also use the Tribes and Exiles table instead of the Rural Villages table because of this volcanic mountain terrain feature. Because maybe this is like the, as we've determined, like some kind of kingdom or an empire. This is its southern border, and perhaps the mountains are sort of where either the exiles flee to or the tribals that raid them reside, one of the two. That could be interesting. It could also just be a regular mountain village. I think I'm going to do a 50-50 here, so I'm going to take a die 6. And 1 to 3 is a rural village, and 4 to 6 is tribes and exiles. That is a very decided 6, so tribes and exiles it is. Let's give our mountains a bit more permanence. Let us see why they are staying here. Roll a die 12, and that might also give us a clue whether they are tribes or exiles or sort of both. That's a 4. They were driven here by a dire enemy. That could still be a displaced tribe, but that also makes me think that the dire enemy is certainly this kingdom or empire, and that makes me want to place it somewhere in this region, because it's close enough to the border, but it's like this cluster of mountains, and then we have the volcanoes there. So let's zoom in a bit. And I think we imagine this sort of cluster of peaks here where the mountain kind of separates into this downwards jut. And here we have volcanic peaks, and it's near impassable terrain. So it's a good escape spot where this empire, this kingdom possibly cannot project power easily. Who runs it? Another die 12? 12. A most charismatic native. Okay, so that unfortunately doesn't tell us much, but band of people driven here by the Northern Realm and led by a most charismatic native. What's our current pressing problem? 5. They're impoverished and can't reach new resources. Well, that might be a reason why they're going down into the nearby dungeon then. I am sort of leaning towards this being less of a tribe and more of a camp of displaced or maybe persecuted outsiders from the kingdom to the north, and maybe among the people that are, for whatever reason, persecuted in the north, there is this tale of this charismatic figure that is up there in the mountains and has created a refuge and draws people into the mountains, where they then realize that it's not all it's cracked up to be, because these people are really in desperate straits there. They are impoverished, they don't have resources, they're starving, and maybe now they're on the cusp of deciding what desperate measures to take. Are they going to raid into the kingdom, or are they going to take chances and maybe explore this weird cave down there somewhere that leads to this bottomless pit and figure out what's there? So the settlement is a refuge for the persecuted among the Northern Kingdom, who spread tales about the charismatic leader in the mountains that draws the desperate to risk the journey. So maybe we have like a natural little valley here among these peaks, and here is where our settlement is located. So it's a settlement in a hidden valley. Well, hidden as far as most people simply aren't foolish enough to go there. Now let's have a look what we can do to approach the nature of our nearby dungeon. And I want to use the Tome of Adventure design here for this, and to begin with, I'm not going to go to the dungeon section right away. I'm going to first approach it from the purpose of the location, where we have a D100 set of double prompts that we can combine to determine what our dungeon location is for, and then we can determine some more of the details. So let's give ourselves our first purpose prompt and roll the percentage die, with the red one going first. 12 burial and 13 chasm. Burial, chasm. We'll note down our prompts here. 12 and 13 is also quite a... And now we start free associating a bit. We have the volcanoes here. We know this is then kind of a forbidding, terrifying landscape. And something is buried here. And the chasm makes me think it's buried deep, deep down. So what do you bury somewhere in a volcanic landscape, deep, deep down in a chasm? Maybe something that you don't want found, and bury it more to make sure that it doesn't come back. It could be a situation where something here has been laid to rest, specifically because it's such a remote, forbidding location, and the hope is that it's never going to be found again. But now there's these people here, and whatever is down there maybe wants to catch these people's attention, and that probably sets events in motion. It tries to lure people to discover it and ultimately free it. Whatever it is, we'll figure that one out for sure. So the nearby dungeon spans into the very depths of the mountain, into the heart of lava and deadly chasms, where in ancient times an ancient evil was laid to ancient rest. I guess that was a bit too many ancients in one sentence. And with the arrival of the refugees, it seeks to lure them into the depths and entice them or trick them into freeing it. That is actually a lot to work with. This could be the defeated overlord of an old-timey darkening that was defeated and is still kind of a legendary figure in the history of this northern realm. And the burial place was chosen because it is an area where nobody really wants to go anyway, because it's so dangerous with its volcanoes, and we can think of all sorts of fire-based creatures, fire elementals, whatever, and only now the displaced and desperate end up there, and now they're within reach of the influence, the whisperings, the enticements of this dormant consciousness in its defeated and, for all intents and purposes, dead body that, however, can still reach out from beyond death and try and, within a very limited scope here in this area, influence the people here now. And that can, of course, lead to all kind of interesting adventure hooks. If our party starts here, maybe as part of this refugee group or new arrivals, and then we start with the weird dreams and with the whispering voices, or maybe with the whatever minions this creature down there has to send out and create some kind of an interest-grabbing scenario that makes the charismatic leader send out a delegation to investigate where are these new threats coming from, where is this new faction in our area is coming from, is this a threat, what are these weird dreams, what is happening? So it's a very interesting prospect. I like this a lot, and I will flesh it out next time. So thank you very much for watching, I'll catch you then, and bye for now.